Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Ethel James, though many people simply know me as Dr. J. And before we go any further, before we talk about leadership, before we talk about legacy or faith or identity, or even emotional intelligence or spiritual intelligence for that matter, or any of the conversations that actually brought you here, I simply want to say thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I really truly mean that. Thank you for clicking on the video. Thank you for your curiosity. Thank you for your time. Because Peter Drucker always says that time is our most scarcest resource. And if we don't manage our time, then nothing else can be managed. And in this world where everything and everyone is asking for your attention, your time is one of the most valuable gifts that you have to give. And today you've chosen to invest some of it with me, and I do not take any of that lightly. And so, as I'm thinking about this, and I'm sitting here in my office surrounded by all of my books, and I have lots and lots of books that, and all of these books, they have shaped me, they have challenged me, they have stretched me and comforted me, and they even have taught me. I realized something, and I realized that every one of these books began the same way, and that was with an invitation to think differently, to see differently, to become differently, and perhaps that's what today is. Let's just call it an invitation. Not to agree with everything that I say, because I promise you that you probably won't, and not to become me, because there's only one me. I'm the original, right? And not to see the world exactly as I see it, but maybe let's think of it as an invitation for us to think, an invitation for us to reflect, to question, to grow, and even to become. Because if you found your way here today, then my guess is that somewhere inside, that there is a conversation that's already happening inside of you. And maybe if we think through it, that maybe it's a conversation about leadership, it's a conversation about purpose, and maybe identity or faith, or maybe it's a conversation about exhaustion. And we could probably all attest to that, right? But maybe it's a conversation about becoming who you were purposed and made and formed and created to be. Maybe it's a conversation you haven't even found the language yet to be able to articulate what it is. But whatever conversation brought you here, please allow me to be the first to say that you are welcome here. Because if you're leading an organization, if you're leading a team, or if you're trying to figure out exactly how to lead yourself, you're welcome here. If you are rebuilding after disappointment, that's real. And if you're carrying vision that feels larger than your current capacity to hold, if you're successful on paper, but quietly asking yourself if there has to be more, you too are welcome here. If you're deeply rooted in faith, if you're still asking questions, if you're confident, even if you're uncertain, and if you know exactly where you're going, or even if you haven't the slightest idea of where to begin, I am going to say that you are welcome here. Because one of the things that I hope you'll actually discover about this space is that belonging doesn't begin when we have all of the answers. Sometimes belonging begins the moment we find a place where we are allowed to ask better questions without fear of retaliation, without fear of somebody projecting their thoughts or their opinions on you. And that's why I hope, and that's what I hope, that this becomes a place for better questions, because I'm not perfect, but better conversations are definitely needed, better leadership, better stewardship, better becoming. And let me say this to you, you don't have to know what room that you need today. You don't have to have a 5-year plan coming here. You don't have to know your next move. And you don't even have to understand why the conversation feels important yet. You just simply have to arrive. And if you'll allow me, when you arrive, I'd be honored to sit with you, to right here in the living room, our virtual living room, for just a little while. Because there are many rooms in this house, but every journey begins here. So welcome. And let me say, Welcome not to a channel, not to content, not to a brand, but welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the living room. Welcome to Legacy Rising with Dr. J. So let's just dive into some of my thoughts because for a long time, I've been trying to answer a question that I believe many of us wrestle with. And that question is, how do you hold all of who you are without feeling fragmented? A piece of you here, a piece of you there, a piece of you here and over there and everywhere else. How do you actually honor every single gift that God has given you without feeling like you're forcing yourself to choose between parts of yourself that were never meant to compete with each other? Because if the truth is told and I'm honest, I spent a long time asking myself questions like, am I a leadership strategist? I'm an executive trainer. Am I an author? Am I a conference host? Am I a woman of faith? Am I a mentor, a speaker, a builder, a teacher? And you know what? The answer eventually became yes. Not because I was actually trying to do everything, because honestly, sometimes I ask God, really, right? But it was because God had never actually asked me to become less of who He created me to be in order to fit into someone else's category. I'm going to pause right there because I want you to think about that. How many of us are actually showing up as what someone else told us that we should be? And perhaps you felt that way too. Perhaps you felt like you were carrying multiple assignments, multiple gifts, multiple responsibilities, burdens, callings, all of that. And maybe somewhere along the line, you did what I was doing. You started asking yourself, am I too much? Am I doing too much? Should I narrow myself down or make myself smaller? Should I pick one thing? And I actually ran into people who constantly tell me you're doing too much. But I knew there was something greater on the inside. There was something that says, you know what? You've been given 20 gifts, 20 talents, and God is expecting a return on those. So let me ask you this question then. What if the problem isn't that you're too much? What if the problem is that you've never been given a house large enough to hold everything that you've been entrusted to carry? I want you to think about that for a second. Because the truth of the matter is that when I realized this, it literally changed my life because I discovered that I didn't need fewer gifts. I needed a governing structure, clarity, alignment, order. I needed a house and that's what Legacy Rising with Dr. J has actually become. This is the front door. This is the living room. This is the place where leadership, faith, and legacy, and emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, identity, purpose, evidence, and becoming, they all get to sit in the same room without competing with one another. This is where, conversations happen. This is where ideas are explored. This is where stories are shared. This is where trust is built. And perhaps most importantly, to me, this is where you get to decide where you need to go next. Because some of you are leaders, some of you are entrepreneurs, some of you are trying to figure out how to lead teams, and some of you are trying to figure out how to lead yourselves. If we think even further, then some of you are trying to rediscover your voice because somewhere along the line, you allowed someone to snatch that voice. You gave them permission to have it because you didn't speak up for yourself. And so this is perhaps where you rediscover your voice. And some of you are carrying visions that feel larger than your current capacity to hold them. And if I think about this a little bit longer, some of you are just simply tired. And even if that's you, I'm going to say all of you are welcome here because this house, it was built with rooms for all of those conversations. And you may eventually discover that, you need the marketplace room. You may discover that you need the library. You may discover that you need the room where we talk about, communication or leadership and teams. You may even discover that you need the room where we talk about identity and evidence and becoming. You may even discover that you need the room where we talk about building a life strong enough to carry the assignment that you have been given. And here's the truth. Right here is the beautiful part that none of these choices are wrong because they all belong to the same house. And one of the things that you'll hear me say often in this place is that I do not separate emotional intelligence from spiritual intelligence because both are necessary to lead people well. Because people are not divided beings. We think, we feel, we believe, we discern, we leave evidence. And here's the real part: anytime leadership that ignores any of these dimensions, you eventually lead only part of the person. And I believe firmly that we're called to lead whole people, and that includes ourselves. So for those of you who may be joining from the Legacy Rising movement, let me say this to you: welcome home. For those of you who found your way here through leadership, my leadership work, welcome home. For those of you who came because of a book that you read that I have written, and there have been many, and I'm not sure if where you can see them, but they're back here, and there's some that are on the way that literally were written authentically at the hands and the wisdom that I have been given by God. Perhaps you are here because of a conference that you have attended, a training that you have attended, over 35,000 plus leaders that are documented that I have trained. Maybe you're here because of a recommendation, or perhaps because you were simply curious enough to click the video. Let me say to you, welcome home. And I'm happy to also tell you that you belong here. Because this channel, it isn't about having all of the answers because I don't have them all, but it is about having the conversations that matter, the honest conversations, the difficult conversations. That's one of the things that I teach consistently: the difficult conversations, the transformational conversations, and the conversations that actually help us build our lives and build teams and organizations and legacies that can actually carry what we've been entrusted to hold. So, before we leave today, I want to leave you with maybe one or two questions, if that's okay. Um, what room do you think you need first? Now, let me be clear: you don't have to have the answer today, and you don't have to have it all figured out. You simply have to be willing to walk through the front door and then sit in the living room long enough to discover where you belong. So, before I close, let me say this: I really want to say something to the person who may still be listening, actively listening and thinking, Dr. J, this sounds beautiful, but my life doesn't feel like a house. It feels like a storm. It feels like an unfinished project at the office, or even unanswered prayers, or even competing responsibilities and ideas that simply won't leave you alone. Could be a vision that feels bigger than your current capacity to carry it. And let me just say this to you: I absolutely unequivocally understand that more than you know, because for a very long time, and I thought the answer was to become smaller, to choose fewer things, to deny parts of myself so that I could fit comfortably into boxes that were never designed for me. And for the person that came up with the idea, think outside of the box. Stop allowing people to put you in the box in the first place. But maybe you've done that too. Maybe you've silenced your own voice because you were afraid that you were too much. Maybe you've hidden your intelligence because you didn't want to intimidate anyone. And maybe you downplayed your faith because you didn't want people to misunderstand you. Maybe you minimize your leadership because leadership looked different on you than it looked on someone else. I want you to think about all of these things because maybe you've convinced yourself that your gifts were competing with one another. But here's my question for you today: what if they weren't? And what if they aren't? What if they were always supposed to work together? What if your compassion belongs beside your strategy? Imagine that. What if your faith belongs beside your leadership? Imagine that. What if your discernment belongs beside your decision making? Are you seeing the connection here? What if your intellect belongs beside your empathy? What if your calling belongs beside your career? And what if your story belongs beside your expertise? What if the very things that you've spent years trying to separate were always supposed to live in the same house? Because that possibility, it changed everything for me because I stopped asking, what do I eliminate? And then I started asking, how do I steward what I have been given? Those are two very different questions. And one comes from fear and the other one comes from responsibility. And perhaps that's the question that I really want to leave with you today. What have you been trying to eliminate that maybe God is asking you to steward instead? I want you to sit with that for a little while in the living room. I want you to journal about it, pray about it, think about it. Because sometimes the answer isn't less. Sometimes the answer is just simply structure. Sometimes the answer is clarity. Sometimes the answer is alignment. And maybe sometimes the answer is building a house strong enough to hold the vision. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you found your way here today. Because this living room wasn't built for conversations. It was built, excuse me, for conversations exactly like this one. And if today's conversation resonated with you, do me a favor. I'd love for you to stay a while, to subscribe to the channel, to join us for the conversations ahead, and share this episode with someone who may be feeling fragmented, someone who may be feeling overwhelmed or uncertain about where they belong. And if you'd like to learn more about me, about my books, leadership work, or speaking and training opportunities, or even the Legacy Rising movement, you can find everything at dretheljames.com. You'll find the doors there. The rooms are here. And together we'll continue the conversation. And next time in the living room, we're going to talk about something that I believe many gifted people wrestle with, but very few people ever say out loud: why I built the house. Because the truth is, the house wasn't built because I had everything figured out, and I certainly did not. The house was built because fragmentation, being here, being there, being everywhere, had become too expensive. And perhaps you've discovered the same thing. Think about it. And until then, next Wednesday, I want to thank you for the gift of your time and sharing it with me. Thank you for trusting me with your attention, and thank you for walking through the front door. As we go through each week, we are going to begin to expand and expound on leadership, on legacy, on emotional intelligence. And I have a new term that I'm going to be introducing. I will tell you it is profound because we're listening and living in human centered leadership. My name is Dr. Ethel James, strategically known as Dr. J. And I want to say thank you again for the gift of your time and the opportunity to serve you with excellence. Welcome to Legacy Rising with Dr. J. The living room is always open. Come in, sit down, and let's talk. And until next time, take care. God bless.